Welcome to Healing Faith, from lamentation to transformation. Thank you for joining us. We are offering live, real-time captioning and American Sign Language interpretation during today's live program. To view the simulcast that includes these services, please use the link provided in the comments section. If you are viewing the program after the live broadcast, please note that it will also be available on our website with closed captioning. My name is Brad Braxton, and I am a curatorial advisor for the 2023 Smithsonian Folklife Festival, Creative Encounters, Living Religions in the United States. Today's conversation is part of the preliminary programming for the 2023 festival. In the summer of 2023, the Smithsonian Folklife Festival will draw hundreds of thousands of people to the National Mall and millions of people through online resources as the 2023 festival examines religious diversity in the United States. If you don't know the Folklife Festival, I encourage you to check out festival.si.edu to learn about our programs and educational resources. Also, stay tuned for more details about creative encounters in the months to come. We are especially grateful to the Lilly Endowment for generously supporting the Creative Encounters initiative in general and today's program in particular. We'll be taking your comments in the live chat below, so please participate. Many people are experiencing trauma, grief, and anxiety in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and continued violence against marginalized groups. In today's conversation, two respected scholars, religious practitioners, and social activists will explore how religion and spirituality can be medicine for the spirit, the body, and the body politic. Now I want to welcome our special guests, Joanne Braxton and Angela O.
Good to be here.
Such a pleasure and a joy, as well as an honor.
Joanne Braxton is the CEO and president of the board of the Braxton Institute, a nonprofit organization that heals cycles of violence through research, education, and community-based public health interventions. She has a PhD in American Studies from Yale University and a Master of Divinity degree from Virginia Union University. She also is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, professor emeritus at William and Mary, and an adjunct professor of family and community medicine at the Eastern Virginia Medical School. Angela O is an attorney mediator, ordained Zen Buddhist priest, and meditation teacher who has integrated the practice of resolving conflict with the practice of calming the mind. As a mediator, her work centers on cases of discrimination, harassment, and hate incidents. She has a Master of Public Health degree from the University of California, Los Angeles, and a Juris Doctor degree from King Hall at the University of California, Davis School of Law. In 2014, she co-created with the artist Tutu, The Gift of Compassion, a program that combines art and contemplative practice for healing. A key first step in healing is diagnosis. The word diagnosis literally means in Greek to discern, or to know through, or to know thoroughly. Many religious and spiritual traditions, such as Buddhism, for example, invite us to use mindfulness and meditation as a means of diagnosing our present circumstances. Angela, you have a short video titled Humanity that enables us to consider mindfulness and meditation. Please provide the context of the video and then we will share it with our audience.
I'd love to do that. These are images that taken together are intended to reflect the face of humanity. Each one has been drawn with only one medium, a silver point pencil by the artist Tutu. And taken together, all 108 would reflect the single face of humanity. But what you'll see in this video is just a selection of a few of those images. All 108 have never been shown. This is not a work that is available to be sold. It will be gifted or it will die along with the artist someday, as we all will. We'll leave this form and we'll go to another form. So just let me just say, I don't know if you can hear me now, can you? That each of these pieces are of individuals who come from different walks of life, and the artist goes into a 45-minute meditation before touching pencil to paper. And he'll work continuously. Sometimes it's just an hour or two. Sometimes it's for 7 or 8 hours. And when he finishes that session, he will withdraw and meditate again for another 30 minutes to close out that particular cycle. This is not really just art. As he describes it, it is meditation manifest. So meditation is not just sitting in quiet. It actually can be engaged in activities, and this is just one form.
Thank you for sharing about that video. And I'm wondering now if you and Joanne might go into some of your personal backgrounds. What in your journey caused you to be a healer? Angela, will you say more about that first? And then Joanne, we'd be delighted to hear some personal reflections that have led you to healing practices.
I'm not sure if this is true, but I'll tell you this story. My grandfathers were both ministers in the Methodist tradition. The missionaries who came to Korea in their generation were offering food and solace for the soul during post-Japanese occupation, when there was an effort to basically destroy the entirety of the culture and the people. And the Buddhists were begging, because that's how we live. We beg. I kind of do that. As a former criminal defense lawyer, I begged a lot. And right now, I find myself begging people in mediations sometimes to be able to see this is an opportunity to bring closure in a healthy way. And in my life, I was fortunate in that I grew up with parents who did not carry the hatred toward the Japanese people. In fact, my spiritual teacher was Japanese Hawaiian. So he reached out to me and showed me a lantern that lit a way for me. I then lived through 92 in Los Angeles. Today, we are all very familiar with what happens with especially Black men at the hands of law enforcement in communities where the accountability has been unchecked and the power disparities are tremendous. Los Angeles was a place that manifested a lot of our societal ills in the early 90s with unemployment and wealth disparities starting to show up and poor police-community relations. And when the videotape of Mr. King being beaten was captured, it lit things. And that wasn't the first time people who were on the margins tried to have a voice in this society. As you know, in the 60s, we had a whole bunch of efforts to move toward more dignity and decency in this society. And now we have, of course, more recently, George Floyd. We had before that, James Byrd. We've had since that so many others. So we see that little progress has been made, and yet at the same time, I have to say a lot of progress has been made. So this is where I come from. I'm a public health educator by training. I'm a lawyer. I came to law school because I wanted to represent labor as opportunities would have it. I did not. I represented people who were criminally charged in our state and federal courts. I got very close to a lot of the intersections of our identities, of institutional racism, of our own ignorance, and I saw the suffering firsthand. And my teacher, who tapped on my shoulder in the late 1990s, lit a path for me that I knew was the right path. It wasn't very lucrative, but it was the right path for me.
Wonderful reflections. Joanne, tell us something about your journey to being a healer.
I was called to be a healer. I didn't ask to be a healer. And like many people in this position, I might have preferred not to be. But it was irresistible and undeniable when Jerome Carter and Ashley came to me at William and Mary after Trayvon Martin was murdered and asked me to speak on the steps of the historic Wren building constructed by slaves on the care of the soul in this world, for which I was given 5 minutes. What a responsibility and what a gift. In moments like that, or in moments like September 11th, 2017, when I was privileged to be one of the co-conveners, the Braxton Institute and the Soul Repair Center of Moral Injury and Collective Healing at Princeton Theological Seminary. September 11th, 2017, we'd had a ritual commemorating the losses at the World Trade Center. And I was teaching a session on narrative medicine with Dr. Nigel Hatton when I offered a prompt. Write about where you were when the Twin Towers fell. What were you doing that day? And I noticed there was a small group of people who seemed a bit frozen. And I asked the question, if you would like some support, please raise your hand and I will come to you. And the gentleman said to me, I was the captain of a fire company from New Jersey on site at the World Trade Center. That was a moment. That was a moment when, as a healer, I recognized that I also have the responsibility to do no harm. And so I sat with him. And later, when I asked individuals who would like to share to come forth, I was emboldened by this captain's courage. And he stood with his paper in his hand, and he almost shuddered, finding it hard to speak. And in that moment, I was called to ask for permission to touch. And I laid my hand on his back, and he spoke with deep courage, and it was a healing moment for him. The same day, I asked a prompt, I created a prompt that I often use. When was the last time you went to jail? When was the last time you went to prison? Many of us go to prison as ministers or as family members. It's something that we feel the responsibility to do. But a small young woman came forth to read her memory. And she wrote, the first and last time I went to prison was August 2003. It was Abu Ghraib prison. This small Black woman, less than 5 feet tall, had been a prison guard at Abu Ghraib. She read her testimony, and then she cried. She says, I became overwhelmed with emotion for the first time in a long time. It felt okay to cry, to let it out. And so being a healer sometimes is nothing more than being a good spiritual compassionate person who facilitates the emergence of the story that is already there and ready to be given voice to.
As you have each told us some of your story, the story that is there, I am struck by some of the episodes that you raise, whether it's international harm, as you've just mentioned there, Joanne, or what happened in various moments in the streets of the larger cities of our country as it relates to individuals and law enforcement. There's so many different examples that we are encountering of harm. Please share with us from your religious and spiritual traditions how you understand the sources and symptoms of harm. Talk to us more about what harm looks like, where harm comes from. Joanne, you please first.
Well, I think harm comes from many different places. And today we are experiencing collective trauma. I've enjoyed and benefited from the work of Jack Saul and Judith Herman, especially on collective trauma and collective healing, and also the work of Rebecca Parker and Rita Nakashima Brock, among others, because we understand violence. We don't always understand how our failure to prevent violence harms us as a witness, witnessing violence against another person, not being able to protect someone who is in your care. What do you say to college students who are questioning whether they can be safe on a university campus when a young man has been shot to death going to buy a box of Skittles? This is harm. It is not always visible. And so much of my work has been about addressing the invisible harm of moral injury or moral suffering, which is something that we all experience to a degree. Suffering is part of what comes with the human experience, but we can learn from the experiences of others how to address the harm that surrounds us, the harm that we see, the harm that we cannot prevent. And we can also quite consciously observe in ourselves the capacity to unintentionally harm others, even as we are trying to do the right thing. It's so important to listen deeply and to render the help that really helps so that one is not unintentionally creating harm, even as one is attempting to be moral and compassionate. Deep listening is incredibly important to staying connected in a responsible and compassionate way. We don't always succeed, but we can hold ourselves accountable and we can do the work that is the interior work, as well as the work of healing harm in the world around us.
Thank you for so carefully delineating those dimensions of healing and how delicate this work actually is. Angela, please share with us your diagnosis of the sources and symptoms of harm.
Oh, so I would have to say just fundamentally that it's the complete lack of understanding oneself and the ignorance that comes from that take forms in a myriad of ways. I would say that harm itself or injuries can be physical, they can be emotional, they can be spiritual, they can be, in today's world, political. I see harm through the lens of poverty, which at this point in our society's development, there's not an excuse for people being unhoused or not being able to feed their children. And I also see the abuse of our natural world as a harm that doesn't get as much attention, but it's mostly human beings that are exploiting the fact that there are these natural resources that are so precious, and we're not paying attention to our relationship to the natural world as much as we are also suffering and faltering in our failure to see ourselves in the other, whoever the other may be. When I was involved with the first sort of presidential effort under Clinton in his One America initiative to try and open dialogue around race and racism and how it's affected our society and how it's really infected us in many ways. It was an initiative that was highly criticized for a lot of reasons, but the fact of the matter is that human beings are still not quite evolved to the point where we can do without talking with one another, sitting with one another, listening to one another, creating spaces that are caring, generous, and really safe for people to ask questions, real questions that they have that are usually coming out of their own life experience. I ask people, there's a particular tension around Blacks and Asians. It used to be around Koreans and Blacks. Now it seems to have morphed into Blacks and Asians as a tension point in our contemporary condition. And I will ask, how many times have you had somebody at your home who's not just like you? Especially the quote activist elements in our community who, are obsessed with power, who are obsessed with obtaining power. And I don't have a problem with power. I think, if you use it in the right way, it could be fabulous. I haven't seen enough examples of that on a societal level. It's shameful. It's absolutely shameful that there are children, elders, people who are not able-bodied, disabled in our society, who are forced to use processes that are not really designed for them. It's shameful that the people who can least afford time out of their precious lives, and their lives are just as precious as mine, but they have to wait in queue. They have to find the language access. They have to be able to find somebody who can navigate, because we don't have the capacity to help another human being, but we have the capacity to put human beings into outer space. It's shameful, in my opinion. And, this is clearly why I have to meditate. You can see my temperature rising. I would be a really horrible human being if I didn't move into silence on a very regular basis.
As our dialogue is evolving, I am so inspired by the multiple levels of your identities and the spaces where you've been, the places where you've worked. In many public conversations, there's a lot of talk about intersectional work, thinking about our professional identities, our race, gender, religion, sexual identity, all of these different identity markers. I'm curious now for you to talk from any and all of those spaces about how you understand healing. What does healing look like? What are the healing practices in your traditions? What are healing communities with which you're familiar now doing to actually bring this place of justice and restoration and peace to people and to the broader body politic?
I love what Angela said about silence and the necessity, the absolute necessity of retreating into silence on a regular basis in order to stay grounded while addressing the harms that are being done to human beings and to the environment. To be still, to be grounded, to look within, and then to look without is a necessary spiritual grounding for our extremely dangerous times. And being with what is. I also loved what Angela said about the natural world. My new friend, Roberta Uno, talks about the necessity of re-indigenizing. We must get closer to those traditions that revere and value the earth. My friend Omiemi Artisha Green, for example, has followed the whale Tahlequah, who lost her baby and pushed it around in the Pacific for 17 days. What can we learn about loss, grief, and lamentation, that lamentation which is so necessary to confronting the evil that exists? What can we learn about that from animals who know better how to take care of their children and their elders than human beings do sometimes? So let us learn from indigenous peoples, and let us also learn to revere once more the natural world as our ancestors did, and accept responsibility for the harm that has been caused to that world, and also do what we can to be a responsible bridge to the generations coming after us. If it were not for our ancestors who prayed for us, where would we be? And so we have a responsibility not only to them, but to those who will come after us.
I have, thank you so much for the reminder of the ancestors and how spirit moves and is thankfully being recognized more today. I have so many people that I'm engaged with right now in the middle of this pandemic and the wars that are happening on this planet and the political strife, all of whom clearly are dedicating themselves and their life energy to this thing that you're calling healing. You know, healing can be a look on your face as you catch the gaze of somebody who's in deep pain. You don't speak the language, you don't know what their pain is about, but you can see they're in pain. And just how you look at them could make a difference. I think about people like Orland Bishop, who has worked on an international scale with many, many efforts around human development. And he's a healer by 5 generations from his tribal source. He is also somebody who is extraordinarily committed to the least among us. He always talks about sacred hospitality. And we are trying to move that into reality now here in Southern California. He's the founder of the Shade Tree Multicultural Foundation. I think about a young man named Omar Brownson, who started River LA to care for the 50 some miles of the LA River, and now is on a soul journey and is really focusing on gratitude as a way to heal. I think about people like Kazu Haga at the East Point Peace Academy up in Oakland, who's written a book called Healing Resistance. People should look at it if you really want to go into this area of understanding what is harm, what is healing, what is a nonviolent way of responding to all of the harm in our world. I think about Lady Bird Morgan, whose humane hospice program, prisoner hospice program, works up in San Quentin. It's not open now, but she's working on a 300-page curriculum for lifers who are going to be there to help with hospice care for other lifers who are dying inside and will not ever be able to come out, even under compassionate care petition. You know, and I think about people like the new generation, Tracy Ishigo and Sahar Pizarra. They are the founders of Vigilant Love, which was, I don't know if any of you know, but they are the ones that mobilize using social media, all these crowds of people who showed up when under the last last administration, there was an attempt to ban people who were Muslim. I mean, it's just incredible. If you really want to do this work, you see it all around you. And I see, you know, at Commonweal, where the gift of compassion sits, for 45 years, that organization has been doing very quietly, very consistently, very deeply work around healing the earth as well as individuals. You know, they're best known for their cancer help program. That's where they started, but it's become so much more. If you look at what their work is today, it's just jaw-dropping. I feel very, very fortunate to be associated with these human beings who are totally committed to the idea of understanding the intersectionality, because Commonweal doesn't just deal with the individual. It's looking at the science. It's looking at the thought leaders that have been in it for many years. It's looking at politics. It's looking at the financial impacts, and it's constantly reaching for ways to bring people who have not had the privilege to learn and to think and to analyze and to do the research, to come in and begin taking advantage of what they have learned and to share. This is another thing that we could do that's so easy. You know, somebody who has COVID, they're not going to be able to go out and get their food. Maybe you could call up, you know, one of these delivery services and deliver a meal. You know, somebody that doesn't have the ability to pay rent because they're a refugee from another part of the country and they have children and they can't get a job, but they're supposed to stay here and wait for their asylum hearing. You give them money. That's where money is useful, you know, conventional currency. But we all, those of us that work in this space, we don't just operate in conventional currency. We understand social currency. We understand spiritual currency. We understand soul currency. There are many other forms. Artist Tutu talks about when he was, almost dying in his apartment in New York. He knew his gift was an artist. He was going to give that gift to the world, even if it meant dying in the gutter. Right? Then we met. He's not going to die in the gutter.
I would like to add a few things, a few people to that list. I think we should lift up Reverend Dr. William J. Barber and the repairers of the breach. This organization organizes, trains, and works with a diverse school of prophets and to change and address the structural inequalities in our society. And it's a profound spiritual experience as well, to be a part of one of his trainings, because they always include the Christian spiritual disciplines of prayer, meditation, spiritual singing, and laying on of hands, for example. There's many other organizations that need and deserve attention, like the Kindred Southern Collective, which I'd just like to mention, the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute. And I mentioned Roberta Uno earlier, and I'd just like to say that there's going to be a kind of a takeover at the Kennedy Center in February, when We the People's Before is there, and the house is open for all to be present without any fees. So that's going to be a wonderful event. During COVID-19, I've been privileged to work with a number of wonderful healers, including Rochelle Faithful, a wonderful multidisciplinary folk healer and justice advocate, an attorney and a folk healer. Dr. Hatton, Dr. Nigel Hatton, I mentioned earlier. He's been also involved in teaching at San Quentin, teaching at the University of California, Merced, writing about ending cycles of violence in African-American communities, establishing a college curriculum within San Quentin. Dr. Rahima Katua, who is a healer of healers, an MD with a bachelor's from Harvard and training at Mount Sinai. And she's been on 3 medical school faculties. She's becoming a wonderful teacher of meditation as well. And I also want to lift up the work of Rebecca Parker and Rita Nakashima Brock for addressing violence and the notion of the way that suffering has, the notion of redemptive violence has been used to oppress people, really, and to imprison them in false ideologies. So Christianity itself needs healing, and Brock and Parker have played an important role in that. I would also, this is my last mention, Karen Harper Royal, who is founder of the Jesuit descendant community that is seeking to heal the ancestors. So when we look back in time and we look at the things that were done to our ancestors, if we can begin using family trees and DNA to reconnect families that were destroyed and scattered by enslavement, that too is the work of healing. So these are people I've been working with during the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm so grateful for them. There are many others who could be mentioned. And as we've said before, this program could easily have been twice the time. So thank you for the opportunity.
It's a very inspiring roll call of healers and a reminder to us that marvelous restorative work is happening in so many places. and that the narrative is not all negative. There is a word for wellness. There is a word for wholeness that is being sounded in so many places. We have a comment from Marion who asks, what about healing through prayers, kindness, helping others, journaling? Would you like to speak about some of those practices and others that come to your heart and mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Every single one of those words that you mentioned have has the power to be medicine that can solve the injury. So yes, prayer, kindness for sure. We could use a lot more of that in our world. Just being there for others, as I mentioned, and journaling is something that I actually do use on a regular basis. I do like to write. I don't publish my writings. I've done one small collection of essays. But because of 1992 coming up on 30 years and a lot of the issues that were raised back then still being very current, I feel like I have to write about my lens because of the experience I had in Los Angeles in 92. And I'm still here in Southern California in 2022. So
I also use journaling for resilience and had the opportunity to work with scientists at NIH in their intramural training department to address some of the stresses and some of the moral distress that sometimes goes along with scientific research. So I believe that journaling is something that can be used across disciplines, and that we need to have more and more transdisciplinary conversations about how to address this moral distress. Each discipline has some knowledge that another discipline needs, but we sit in our silos in silence, and we don't always reach out. So conversations like this one are tremendously inspiring, and I'd love to have many more of them.
In hearing you all say that, what comes to my mind is the need, as we strive to be healers, for more humility and more curiosity. Asking those questions of others about how they go about healing, learning from them, and also with courage, being willing to teach from our own perspectives and modalities of healing. I would like to pick up for just a moment a thread from earlier in the conversation. I was really struck by this notion of perhaps multiple connections or multiple dimensions of reality. You talk about the ancestors or almost a sense of cosmology, things we can see, things we can't see, the exterior parts of reality, the interior parts of reality, connection with the earth. Would you like to pick up just a bit more on your understanding of your connection to various parts of reality and what it means to be in a healing conversation with multiple parts of existence?
Well, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. So I would like to start with that and ask Angela to
yes.
comment.
Yes. Oh, I was thinking about, this notion of needs and desires in connection with how we find ourselves in places of suffering. Uh, needs are something that manifests physically. You need something, you know what it is, you get it. Desire is sort of in the realm of you'll never get what you desire because that's why it's a desire, right? And our title is From Lamentation to Transformation. And we spent a lot of time in this society lamenting, and everybody has their solution. What I love about being in the place where I am now at the age of 65 is I am manifesting what I used to talk about 30 years ago, and that is that I am the person who works in the interstitial space. In other words, it's by definition essential, but it's kind of formless. It's like the nervous system. The body doesn't work if that's not in order. It's like the blood system. It doesn't work if that's not healthy. It's like you can have a healthy heart, a healthy liver, a healthy kidney in itself, perhaps, but none of it's going to function right if the interstitial structure isn't there. This is the space that we're moving into, I think, when you start talking about things like critical race theory, which is only an invitation for you to look at these intersections in connection with law. Okay. So this isn't a thing that you can introduce to a 5-year-old. It's a thing that you have to understand. It's a way to see things in a particular context, but it has a lot of applications. You know, I think Kim Crenshaw, when she first came up with this this idea, was talking about her own reality. She's a woman. She's African American. She's a professor. She has her own personal story, which I don't know all the details of, but she's not just, you know, one thing in any given moment. None of us are. We are somebody's child. We are somebody's sibling. We are somebody's partner. We are somebody's parent. We are somebody's enemy. We are somebody's friend. So just in our being, we have all of those levels. And, you know, we all know that the brain, it's not fully operational, meaning we use such a very small part of this thing that we call the brain. The mind is another thing, the spirit, an entirely other thing. And we have capacity. I know this from my practice. We have capacity to develop and build our ability to know the unknowable. And sometimes, in other words, the unknowable should be left unknowable, right? So
I love this, and it reminds me of a term that Rita Nakashima Brock, another person who embodies multiple belongings, uses, and that term is interstitial integrity. And there is a space that we can reach for where we can be whole and where all of the intersectional parts of our experience can be called upon as strengths and not merely as reflections of the multiple oppressions that befall us in these different identities that we carry. In Rita's case, being Japanese American and also a Puerto Rican. Many of us have many identities, some of which we've been taught to despise. And that too is a journey, claiming the identity that I was taught to despise. This is something Audre Lorde taught us to address. And it's something that we have to do over and over and over again. It's not a one and done thing. It's never done. Each day we awake to a new phase of the journey.
Both of you are healers, and both of you have been very involved in the public life of the world. Many people try to create an perhaps unhealthy antagonism between activism and contemplation, the life of interiority. Would you say just a bit more about your understanding of the relationship between being out there and then also going within? What's that relationship been like for you?
oh, let me see. I would say that, you know, one of the things that Tutu and I do are workshops for social activists, you know, for their own self-care and to take a pause in life. And I think that for myself, I just realized that for whatever reasons, my karmic trajectory was such that I got to experience very powerful political places and felt the people and the what we would call the ki, the energy of that space. And I knew it wasn't my space. I knew I wouldn't be useful there. And I also knew that the things that were required to be effective would not be something I could do easily, if at all. So I chose to reflect, first of all, and in that reflection period is when I met my teacher. And I remember vaguely, now that you're mentioning it, that some of the activist scholars used to say, what's with all these Asian, Asian American leaders who are progressive, retreating into this spiritual stuff. And now, of course, many of them are exploring their own spiritual journey because they realize that the mind, especially in the context of, the academic training that we all have been exposed to, those of us that pursued, quote, higher education. My teacher said, you know what those degrees give you? They just give you a marketable personality. That's it, right? So it's like, oh yeah, he says, try really seeing who you are, right? So to do that, you're not going to read it in a book. And I don't care if you're a corporate person or a public servant or an activist, there's a certain set of lessons that are never going to be written down. It's like the anciently, we had teachers. You had to be with someone who knew and who was caring enough to show you something. You don't get, just because you have all the books that everyone recommends doesn't mean you know a damn thing. I can't tell you how many people in a corporate environment in particular work hard, have the credentials, thought they were doing the job well. They were missing something. Something wasn't happening. They weren't getting the opportunities. We can call that structural racism or implicit bias or, the need for more DE&I training, all of which I think have limited impact from what I've seen over the years. There's another training manual. It doesn't exist in the material world. It is entirely relational. And this is what I think our indigenous brothers and sisters, they know. This is how they've been able to stay present to the present. They know, they have knowledge. It's not written down. You have to be in relationship with. Then you may access. And that depends on how sincere your interest is in knowing who you are.
Let me say this. I was going to say, Joanne, let me just say this because of the time that is upon us now. I wanted to ask you this question, Joanne. In our preparatory conversations, you mentioned that brilliant moment that you had with Maya Angelou when she suggested that any responsive moderator should conclude a discussion with the question, is there something that I did not ask you that I should have asked you? So let me ask you first, Joanne, and then Angela. Is there something that I did not ask you that I should have asked you? And feel free to wrap up any of your comments underneath that.
Brad, I wanted to ask you about your role as a healer. Could you give us just a few sentences of that? Because you have been prominent and you're not just a facilitator or a moderator. You are healing just by bringing us together. How about a little word from you?
You are kind to offer me that invitation. I will say very quickly, when I think about being a healer, I remember those words that are often spoken to beginning medical students: do no harm.
Amen.
And for me, I realize that there have been persons who have healed me. And at times, those surgeons have had to cut through tissue to get to the pathology. But even in making incisions, they were not harming me. And so I come at being a teacher, being a faith leader, being a provocateur, mindful that sometimes we must be incisive in order to get to pathology. But our ultimate goal, even in those moments of incisiveness, is to do no harm. So in every space I enter, my goal is to heal without doing any harm. As we have talked about, this is 3 conversations, 4 conversations. And we hope that on other occasions, there will be opportunities that we can hear again from Joanne and Angela. A final word from each of you, and then I will take us to a close.
I would just like to express my gratitude for being invited to this conversation with 2 people whose life work I respect so profoundly. Thank you both very much.
Likewise, thank you both for creating this container, this time, this energy. And I think this is recorded, so leaving this for others that couldn't be here with us today. So thank you.
It is my profound hope that on some other occasions, Spirit will bring us back together. It'll be a different time and space and configuration, but I know there is so much more for us to discuss. As we move, and may it be so, as we move now from diagnosis to prognosis and embrace healing practices and approaches and engage in relationships that transform us in positive ways, let us return again to the practice of meditation. Joanne, you have a short video titled Tree of Life Meditation that enables us to consider again mindfulness and meditation. Will you please provide the context of the video, and then we will share it with the audience.
This video was created by Dr. Rahima Katua, a pediatrician and a healer of healers, chief wellness consultant to the Tree of Life Project. Ain't you got a right to the Tree of Life? The old African-American spiritual asks. And we need the answer to that question to be a resounding yes in a culture and a climate that does not always love us, in a culture and a climate where trees have been turned into weapons, and they need to be turned once more into that which heals us. So you will see the image of the tree. You will hear the voice of Dr. Rahima Katua, who created this unique meditation for the Black Faith Matters Tree of Life Project. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share it.
This Tree of Life meditation is an invitation to use the image of a tree to support and nourish our innermost selves with love, reverence, and compassion. Standing or sitting, whichever you prefer, closing your eyes if you'd like, I invite you to gently place a hand over your heart or your belly, whichever feels the most nourishing for you. If this is not comfortable, please place your hands in your lap or anywhere else that serves you in this moment. Welcoming yourself here to this moment, I invite you to simply be present in this experience, allowing thoughts and feelings to arrive, visit, and pass as they will, beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. Only us, here, now, together in our wholeness. Bringing to mind the image of a towering tree with a big trunk, deeply rooted in the earth, solid, grounded, stable, and yet also flexible as its branches move in the wind and rain. Flexible stability.
What a beautiful way to conclude this conversation. We are grateful to Joanne Braxton and Angela O for sharing their experiences and insights with us. Thanks as well to the audience for participating, all those who watched and listened and commented. Furthermore, we appreciate Smithsonian Folklife Festival staff, including Elisa Huff, Sarah Rothman, Diane Nutting, Alexander Taggart, Maya Cassidy, and Sabrina Lynn Motley for their expertise and effort in support of this program. Follow the Smithsonian Folklife page on Facebook to get notifications about future events. Find us also on Instagram and YouTube. Visit our website and please return here for our next program. I close with fitting words from Naeem Akbar, another healer. He once said, "Whatever we can do to facilitate learning on the one hand and loving on the other is important, because learning and loving are the most healing forces available to us. Go forth in a spirit of peace and positivity, and please be well."